I used to believe that the biggest family embarrassment at my son's wedding would be my simple navy dress among a sea of designer gowns. I was wrong. The real humiliation came when my new daughter-in-law proudly introduced me to her wealthy parents, and her father nearly collapsed when he recognized me. Not as Dylan's mother, but as the secret multimillionaire who bought his company, the anonymous investor he had spent 3 years trying to identify. Imagine standing at your only child's wedding, clutching your purse, smiling politely, trying not to cry from pride, only for a man worth hundreds of millions to stare at you like he'd seen a ghost. "My God, aren't you the woman who bought Reynolds Holdings?" he whispered. And suddenly everyone was staring at me. My son, my new daughter-in-law, her glamorous mother, and the circle of guests who seconds earlier were laughing and clinking champagne glasses. 15 years of silence. 15 years of strategic invisibility. 15 years of letting the world believe I was a quiet widow living modestly off an engineer's pension. All undone in one breath. I felt my stomach drop. For the first time in years I wasn't invisible. I was exposed. Jessica's smile froze on her face, confusion flickering behind her mascara-coated lashes as she looked from her father to me, as if she were rearranging every assumption she had ever made about me. Her mother's hand flew to her diamond necklace. Her father's eyes sharpened. My son's jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. The orchestra kept playing, the ice sculpture kept glittering, and the waiters kept pouring champagne, but for me the world stopped. "Emily Turner," Robert Reynolds repeated, loud enough for the people beside us to hear. "You're the investor who bought my company." I swallowed hard. I had been careful for 15 years. Private. Deliberate. Invisible by design. Because wealth, real wealth, moves quietly. I had chosen my dress carefully, my jewelry carefully, my life carefully. I never imagined the first person to expose me would be the father of the woman who asked me, twice, whether I needed financial help in my old age. But that was only the beginning. What none of them knew, not yet, was that my face appearing at that wedding wasn't just an awkward moment. It was the match that would ignite a war. A war for control. A war for legacy. A war for my son's future. And Jessica, my new daughter-in-law, had no idea she was about to pick a fight with a woman who had already outmaneuvered CEOs, tech giants, and an entire acquisition board. He thought I was harmless. He was wrong. The moment Robert Reynolds recognized me, the atmosphere at the wedding shifted. Subtly at first, like a faint tremor under polished marble floors. But tremors become quakes, and this one was already rumbling beneath the string quartet's elegant melody. I felt every pair of eyes sharpen on me. Jessica recovered first, or at least tried to. She let out a laugh that was a few notes too high, a few beats too late. "Wait, you're joking, right?" she said, clinging to her father's arm, smiling for the guests watching her. "She's just Dylan's mom. She's..." "Emily Turner," Robert interrupted, and the smile vanished from his face. Not rude. Not angry. Worse. Calculating. It was the look of a man mentally rearranging the chessboard, quickly realizing he'd severely underestimated a pawn that wasn't a pawn at all. I straightened my posture, said nothing, and reached for my glass of water as calmly as if he'd asked me whether I liked the flowers. Jessica blinked rapidly, mascara-heavy lashes fluttering like she hoped they could blink the truth away. "But, you told us you lived on your pension," she finally whispered to me, voice trembling with something that sounded very close to frustration, or betrayal. "I do," I said softly. "It just isn't the pension you assumed." A nearby group of guests pretended they weren't eavesdropping. The music swelled just enough to cover their whispers. My son Dylan stepped closer, protective tension rolling off him. "Mom, what's going on?" he murmured. I looked at him. My sweet boy, my only child, my pride. He knew I lived simply. He knew I didn't like attention. But what he didn't know was that after his father died, I took the remainder of his life insurance, cleaned out the retirement investments, and used everything I had left to take a gamble on a failing company. Reynolds Holdings. The same company owned by the powerful man now staring at me like his whole world had rearranged itself. I had bought it quietly. Rebuilt it quietly. Sold divisions quietly. Tripled its value quietly. I never wanted anyone to know. Not even Dylan. He had his own life to live. I never wanted my financial world to bleed into his. But that privacy was cracking apart now, splinter by splinter. Robert stepped toward me, lowering his voice. "Why didn't you ever come forward? Why stay anonymous?" I breathed in slowly. Because anonymity was safety. Because money attracts the wrong people. Because power is quieter when it's invisible. But I didn't say that. Instead I replied, because I could. His wife, adorned in enough diamonds to blind a solar eclipse, exhaled sharply. "So all this time we thought Dylan married into a struggling family," she murmured. "And instead, She didn't finish. He didn't need to. The implication dripped from her lips like expensive perfume. That was when Jessica's expression changed. Not shock. Not awe. Not even confusion. But opportunity. It flickered in her eyes like a spark. A spark that sent a cold chill down my spine. She stepped closer, touching my arm in a way she had never done before. "Emily, you should have told us," she said, her tone soft, warm, far too warm. "We're family now. You didn't have to hide from us." Her fingers tightened ever so slightly, as if she already believed she had a claim on me, on my life, my decisions, my wealth. I smiled back, a polite, distant smile I'd used in boardrooms and negotiation tables. "I wasn't hiding," I said gently. "I just had nothing to prove." That statement landed like a challenge, soft in tone, sharp in truth. Robert adjusted his tie, the gears in his mind turning fast. "Well, Emily, since you're here," he said, "perhaps we should talk business sometime." "There's actually—" "No," I said, meeting his gaze without blinking. "I'm not here for business. I'm here for family." Jessica tensed beside me. Her father raised a brow. His wife pursed her lips. My son looked like he was witnessing a conversation in a language he didn't understand. Me. I felt the moment tighten around us like a wire. This was no longer a wedding. This was the beginning of a shift. A shift in power. A shift in loyalty. A shift in how everyone in that room saw me. I could feel it. Jessica's mother watched me with new, assessing eyes. Robert Reynolds no longer saw me as Dylan's modest mother. My new daughter-in-law saw me as something else entirely. A door. A ladder. A vault. And my son? He was beginning to sense that I had secrets he never imagined. But I had no idea then how quickly this revelation would spiral. Into greed, into manipulation, into an all-out battle for influence over my own child. And Jessica, she was about to show me the kind of woman she truly was. Not a bride. Not a daughter. Not even an enemy. But a strategist. A strategist who thought I was outmatched. He was wrong. Because once Jessica realized who I truly was, not the quiet widow in a simple navy dress, but the woman who had once owned her father's empire, her entire demeanor toward me changed. Not gradually, easily. As the wedding reception continued, I kept catching her watching me with a new, unsettling intensity. Gone was the polite distance, the minimal effort smiles, the casual dismissals. Gone was the patronizing tone she used every time she offered to help me manage my bills, assuming I was one late payment away from homelessness. Now she looked at me like a vault she just discovered had no lock. And every time our eyes met, she gave me a smile that was too sweet, too polished, too rehearsed. I'd seen that smile in boardrooms. I'd seen it from CEOs preparing to make a move. I'd seen it from men who underestimated me and regretted it. But this time it came from my new daughter-in-law. And that made it personal. Barely half an hour after the awkward exposure, Jessica practically glued herself to my side, dragging me from one table to the next, introducing me to every guest as if she'd just discovered a missing royal lineage. "This is Emily," she chimed, gripping my arm a little too tightly. "Dylan's mother. The one who, well, let's just say she has an impressive business background." Her mother gave me thin smiles. Tight, glossy, artificial. Her father kept trying to corner me into a private conversation. My son looked overwhelmed by the sudden attention on our family. Me. I watched Jessica perform. Watched the way she repositioned herself. Literally taking my arm and shifting me closer to the center of groups, as if proximity to me elevated her. Watched how guests who previously ignored my presence now leaned in with interest, their voices dripping with curiosity. I could feel the air thickening with greed. It was the same expression I saw on executives who smelled a potential partnership, or a potential payday. Later in the evening, when the toasts were done and the music softened into slow dances, Jessica tugged me aside toward a quieter hallway near the dressing suites. "Emily," she began, cheeks flushed, not from drinking but from excitement. "I've been meaning to ask you something, privately." I inclined my head, caution simmering beneath my polite expression. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said breathlessly. "I didn't know. Well, no one knew what you had accomplished." I remained silent. "And I want you to know that I truly respect women like you. Women who've worked hard. Women who've built things. Women who understand legacy." A carefully chosen word. One that told me exactly where her mind had gone. She reached for my hands, warm palms trembling slightly. "I want us to be close," she whispered. "Truly. Your family now, and Dylan and I will eventually have kids, and I want our future to be strong, stable, united. Children. Future. Stability." All pieces on a chessboard she assumed she could move. But it was what she said next that sent every alarm bell ringing in my head. Maybe we can talk about estate planning soon. Financial transparency is so important for families, don't you think? Estate planning. Transparency. She was barely 3 hours into being my daughter-in-law, and already angling for inheritance. I smiled gently. Estate planning is important, I said, but unnecessary to discuss today. Her smile faltered, but only for a second. No, of course, she chirped, regaining composure. But I just want you to feel comfortable. Safe. Supported. As if she imagined I was a frail old woman in need of guidance, instead of the woman who once orchestrated a silent 8-figure takeover of her father's failing company. I patted her cheek softly. I've been supporting myself since before you were born, dear. The look in her eyes said she heard the message beneath my words. And she didn't like it. During their first dance as husband and wife, Jessica kept glancing over her shoulder, at me, at my table, at the empty glass beside my plate that she suddenly insisted a waiter refill with something more expensive. My son was too blissfully distracted to notice her fixation. But I did. Every glance felt less like affection, and more like assessment. Measurement. Calculation. The Reynolds family watched me too, whispering among themselves. I could feel the narrative shifting in their minds. Not, Dylan married a woman he loves. But rather, Dylan married into hidden wealth. A dangerous narrative. One that destroys marriages. One that can tear apart families. And Jessica, she didn't stop at glancing. Much later, near the end of the night, Dylan approached me, uneasy, hands in his pockets. Mom, why didn't you tell me? He asked quietly. I looked at him, the boy I raised, now a man starting his own life. I placed my hand on his cheek. Because none of it mattered for the life we lived, I said. You didn't need to grow up thinking money was a solution. And you never did. He swallowed. But Jess is confused. She thought we'd be starting from scratch. And you are starting from scratch, I said gently. With your own earnings. Your own choices. Your own life. He nodded, but I could see the thin line of worry between his brows. She's just surprised, he murmured. Oh, he was plotting. But I didn't say that. Not yet. As the reception wound down, Jessica pulled Dylan aside. They whispered in the corner. Her eyes flicked toward me between sentences. His expression tightened, softened, then tightened again. I knew that look. Someone was planting seeds. And someone else was trying to decide whether to let them take root. When they returned, Jessica wore a glowing smile. Dylan looked unsure. Their hands were linked a little too tightly. We were thinking, Jessica said lightly, that maybe we should all have brunch tomorrow. Just us. To talk more about everything. Everything. Meaning, my finances, my estate, my boundaries, my future in their lives. The wedding was over. The performance was ending. The mask was slipping. No. Now the real conflict was beginning. A conflict Jessica believed she could control. A conflict she was preparing to win. But she didn't realize one thing. She had just stepped into an arena against a woman who had survived worse than gold diggers and corporate sharks. A woman who built her life on strategy. A woman who was about to remind everyone, including Jessica, that power, true power, never shows itself first. Brunch the next morning was not a meal. It was an ambush, wrapped in French-pressed coffee and the smell of fresh pastries. I arrived at the Reynolds country estate precisely at 10 a.m., wearing a charcoal gray pantsuit, subtle, elegant, and deliberate. Not flashy enough to provoke them. Not plain enough to be dismissed. The house was quiet when I entered, too quiet for a family that boasted wealth like a birthright. Jessica greeted me at the door with a radiant smile that didn't reach her eyes. Emily, you look wonderful, she said, pulling me into a hug that was just a few seconds too long. Affection or surveillance? Hard to say. Then she stepped aside, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Dad's already in the dining room. He's eager to see you. Of course he was. The man who once viewed me as an acquisition target now wanted clarity, leverage, maybe even a second bite at the empire I'd once owned. I walked in. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature seemed to drop. Robert Reynolds sat at the head of the table, elbows on the wood, fingers interlocked, his expression unreadable but intense. His wife sat stiffly beside him, posture flawless, gaze cool. My son Dylan sat to the right. Jessica sat beside him, strategically positioned between us like a mediator who had already chosen a side. I took the seat directly across from my son. A line drawn quietly without words. The plates weren't even filled before it started. Robert cleared his throat. Emily, I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to continue our conversation from the wedding. I smiled lightly. Oh, I do mind. But I came anyway. Jessica stiffened. Her mother inhaled sharply. My son blinked. Robert chuckled, but it wasn't real amusement. Only respect for the audacity he recognized. Well then, he said, let's be direct. He leaned forward. Is it true you're worth? Stop. My voice was calm, moving. I don't discuss numbers. Jessica exchanged a look with her father, a look that said, she's going to be difficult. Her mother folded her napkin, lips tightening. So then, you did buy Reynolds Holdings? I bought what was left of it, I said. And rebuilt it. The room fell silent. My son looked down at his hands. A storm flickered behind his eyes. Not anger at me but confusion, insecurity, disorientation. He had stepped into a life with assumptions, and those assumptions were crumbling like stale bread. Jessica placed her hand on his knee, squeezing gently. Comfort, yes, but also a reminder. I'm on your side. Which meant by implication I was not. Jessica set her fork down with a soft, decisive tap. Emily, I hope you know we're not judging you. But transparency is important for families. Especially when it comes to planning. Planning what? I asked mildly. She exchanged another look with her father. Jessica inhaled. Well, Dylan and I were thinking about buying a house soon. Something large enough to start a family. And given the circumstances. There was. The attempt to merge finances. Or rather merge mine. She continued, voice syrupy sweet. We just thought, maybe now is the time to talk about how we can all work together. Her father added smoothly, if there are assets connected to my former company, or if there's still equity under your control. No, I said. The word hit the table like a stone dropped in a still lake. Jessica blinked rapidly. Her mother stiffened. Her father exhaled through his nose. Dylan swallowed. I folded my hands neatly. I don't give financial assistance on request. I don't merge estates. I don't fund lifestyles. And I don't get manipulated at brunch. Jessica's face paled. Her father's jaw flexed. Her mother sat straighter. But Emily, Jessica began, her voice trembling with disbelief, we're your family. No, I said gently. Dylan is my family. You're my daughter-in-law. That comes with love, yes, but not entitlement. Her breath caught. And then, there it was. Her real face. The one she had hidden behind foundation, lashes, and diplomacy. A flash of anger. Of frustration. Of thwarted ambition. She masked it quickly but not quickly enough. Dylan finally spoke. Mom, they're not asking for much. They just want to know we're all secure. I turned to him. Son, your security is not for anyone else to define. You have a degree, a job, a future. You can build a life without asking me to bankroll it. But with your resources, he began. I raised a hand. This conversation is moving toward a place neither of us wants to reach. So I'll make this very clear. The table leaned closer, everyone sensing what was coming. I looked at Dylan steadily. You will inherit my estate one day. Not your wife. Not her parents. Not her extended plans. Jessica flinched. But, I continued, inheritance is earned through loyalty, respect, and wisdom, not by pressure or expectation. And it is many, many years away. Jessica's voice cracked. So what? We're just supposed to struggle? While you sit on all that money. I looked at her with calm pity. You're not struggling. You just want more. Her father straightened sharply at the accusation. I continued. I spent 15 years building something. I didn't do it so someone else could spend it for me. Jessica's composure snapped. Fine, she hissed quietly, leaning in. Then maybe Dylan and I should rethink how much we include you in our life. Because if you can't trust us. I didn't blink. Jessica, this isn't about trust. It's about boundaries. Ones you are crossing before the wedding flowers have even wilted. She stared at me stunned. Her mouth trembled but with fury, not sadness. Her fingers dug into Dylan's arm. Say something, she whispered to him. Say something to your mother. My son looked trapped, caught between love and pressure, loyalty and manipulation. I just want us all to get along, he said softly. I touched his hand. We will, I said gently. When everyone understands their place. Silence exploded across the table. Jessica's eyes widened. Her parents froze. And that was when it happened. Jessica whispered so softly only I could hear. You may have money, but I have influence. And Dylan listens to me. I leaned forward. And I have patience, and strategy, and a lifetime of practice dealing with people who think they can outmaneuver me. We held each other's gaze. Two women. One battlefield. One son between us. And in that quiet, dangerous moment I realized something. Jessica didn't just want my money. She wanted control. Control of my son. Control of her image. Control of her future. Control of the story. But she had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated the woman who wrote stories for a living. Now the real war had begun. Brunch ended with strained smiles and brittle politeness. The kind of politeness that cracks like thin ice the moment pressure is applied. I didn't stay long after that. I collected my bag, thanked the house staff, and walked out of the Reynolds estate with the same calm stride I used after every major negotiation of my life. But the war Jessica had been quietly plotting? It didn't wait. It escalated immediately. 2 days after the brunch, I received a call from Dylan. He sounded exhausted, his voice tight with something he didn't want to say. Mom, Jess wants us to look at houses this week. She thinks we've been underestimating what's possible. She said with your situation, we should aim higher. There was pressure. The entitlement. The strategy. Kept my voice even. And what do you think, Dylan? He hesitated. I think it would be nice to have help getting started. My heart clenched. Not because he asked, but because Jessica had gotten to him. Swiftly, steadily, strategically. She had planted the idea that I owed them a foundation. That my success was incomplete unless they benefited from it. That her marriage entitled her to my assets. I see, I said quietly. Put her on the phone. There was a rustling sound, a whispered exchange. Then, hello Emily, Jessica said, sugary sweet. Her voice dripped with false warmth, as if she hadn't all but threatened to cut me out of their lives days before. I hear you're concerned about us buying a house, she continued. No, I corrected. I'm concerned about manipulation disguised as planning. The silence on her end tightened like a noose. She inhaled sharply. I'm not manipulating anyone, she said. I'm asking for involvement. Isn't that what families do? Families, I replied, don't start conversations about love with dollar signs. Her breath hitched. You're making this difficult. Good, I said. That makes 2 of us. Another silence. Then in a quiet voice edged with desperation she tried to hide. Emily, we need your help. There was the raw truth. Not the polished brunch speech. Not the coy illusions. Just the exposed hunger beneath it all. Before I could answer she added, too quickly. And think about your grandchildren. We want to start trying soon but we can't bring a baby in too. Stop, I said. Her words froze. Do not use imaginary children as leverage. Ever. That shut her down instantly. I ended the call without raising my voice, without emotion, without even saying goodbye. Because something had just become crystal clear. Jessica wasn't just greedy. She was escalating. And escalation always has consequences. That evening Dylan came to my house. Not to visit. Not to talk. To demand. He stood in my living room, shoulders stiff, eyes stormy. Jess says you hung up on her, he said. I did, I answered. She was crying for an hour, he continued, voice cracking. She thinks you hate her. She thinks no means hate, I corrected. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. I don't want to be between you two. You aren't, I said softly. She put you there. Mom, she just wants us to have a chance. She wants access, I replied. And she's using you to get it. He froze. For a moment I saw my son, the real him, questioning everything, trying to find his footing in a battle he didn't sign up for. But then Jessica's influence slid back over him like a shadow. She thinks you don't trust her, he whispered. I don't, I said simply. That was the breaking point. He looked up, hurt and angry. You're going to ruin this marriage, he said. If you don't stop treating her like an enemy, you're going to lose me. My chest tightened, painful, sharp, piercing. Not because of the threat, but because it wasn't his voice in that sentence. It was hers. The exact tactic I knew she would eventually use. Isolate him from me. Control the narrative. Turn boundaries into betrayal. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I had been here before. In boardrooms where alliances shifted on emotion, fear, pressure. And I knew the truth. When someone starts weaponizing love, clarity becomes the only antidote. I exhaled slowly. Dylan, I said, sit down. He didn't want to, but he did. I kneeled beside him, my hands on his. Son, I want your marriage to thrive. But thrive on love, not dependency. Not manipulation. Not pressure from her family. Not the expectation that I will bankroll your future. He swallowed hard. I just want peace, he whispered. I know, I said. And peace comes from stability, not money. Not bribes. Not control. I met his eyes. And if Jessica ever forces you to choose between us, that is not a wife protecting her marriage. That is a woman protecting her agenda. He flinched. Because deep down he knew I was right. 2 days later, Jessica did exactly what I feared. He came to my house. Unannounced. To apologize. Or so I thought. She arrived in a designer coat, perfect makeup shaking slightly, a performance of fragility. Emily, she said, voice trembling, I don't want us to fight. Neither do I replied. She nodded, wiping imaginary tears. Then let's fix this. All you have to do is show me you trust us. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. I felt my stomach sink. She slid it across the table. What is this? I asked. A joint investment agreement, she said softly. Something small. Something symbolic. So we can prove we're in this as a family. I stared at her. Not at the papers. At her. Her eyes were bright, hungry, hopeful. She truly believed she had cornered me. That she had found a way to force my hand. That my love for my son outweighed my principles. That I was finally within reach. Financially, emotionally, strategically. But she had miscalculated. Terribly. I picked up the folder, walked calmly to my fireplace, opened the glass gate, and dropped it in. Flames devoured it instantly. Jessica gasped, stumbling backward. What are you doing? I turned to her. Calm. So unshakable. Ending this, I said. Her voice rose to a shriek. You can't do that. Dylan will. Dylan, I cut in, will learn that marriage is not built on ultimatums. He froze, chest heaving. I stepped closer. And you, I said softly, will learn that I do not negotiate with manipulation. Not in business. Not in family. Not ever. Her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but rage. You're ruining everything, she whispered. No, I said. I'm protecting everything. She stood there, shaking, furious, defeated, a woman realizing she had pushed too far too fast against the wrong person. She stormed out of my house without another word. The battle had reached its climax. And she had lost the most important round. In the end, it wasn't the lawyers, the contracts, or even the money that won. It was silence. Not my silence. Theirs. The same family that once treated me like a fragile old widow suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. The wedding guests who whispered behind champagne flutes now moved aside when I walked past, as if they feared accidentally offending the wrong person. Even Robert Reynolds, who once practically glowed with arrogance, avoided speaking above a polite murmur around me. But the one whose silence shook me the most was Jessica. My daughter-in-law, she who strutted through life like no one could stop her, now approached my home with careful steps, like she was stepping into a boardroom where she wasn't the most powerful woman anymore. The same girl who once offered me financial help out of pity, now shifted uncomfortably as she entered my living room, hands clasped together, knuckles white. I want to apologize, she whispered. The words hung in the air. Not because I didn't expect them, but because I remembered every moment she made me feel small. Every time she corrected me in front of people. Every time she acted embarrassed by me. Every time she asked whether I could afford something. Every time she looked at my modest clothes as though poverty might be contagious. I judged you, she said slowly. And I shouldn't have. I didn't respond. I didn't rescue her. I let her sit in the silence she earned. He swallowed. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, I finally said. You treated me based on who you thought I was. A flush crept up her neck. But I'm trying, she whispered. I want to start over. It wasn't the apology I wanted. But it was the only one she could give. When she left, Dylan came by the next day, this time without her. He sat on my sofa, running a hand through his hair like he used to do as a teenager when he didn't know what to say. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner. There it was. The apology that actually mattered. I placed my hand on his. You were in love. You saw what you wanted. That's normal. But I should have listened to you. I smiled softly. Then listen now. He nodded, quieter than usual, letting his shoulders drop like he was finally exhaling after weeks of tension. And that's when the real shift happened. He looked at me not as his fragile, aging mother, but as the woman he finally understood me to be. Strong, capable, a force. News of my reveal spread faster than the bouquet toss. Some guests apologized for how they behaved toward me at the reception. Others suddenly wanted to befriend me, so transparently opportunistic that I had to stop myself from laughing. But the ones who surprised me most were Robert and his wife. They invited me to dinner. A quiet restaurant. A private room. Fine crystal velvet seats and low lighting. We owe you an apology, Robert said. We misjudged you. His wife nodded stiffly. Terribly. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I simply replied, many people do. That evening something shifted in their approach to me, not fear, not intimidation, something else. Respect. The kind that can't be faked. The kind that only appears when someone realizes the person they underestimated could have destroyed them, yet chose not to. Weeks later, Jessica came to me again. This time not to apologize, not to beg, but to ask for advice. Real advice. About business. About strategy. About protecting her and Dylan's financial future. I don't want to make the mistakes my parents made, she admitted. I want to learn. It was the first time I saw her not as an adversary, but as a very young woman trying to grow into the role life thrust upon her. And perhaps for the first time, she looked at me as family. I leaned back in my chair, studying her for a long moment. I'll teach you, I said. But only if you understand something first. She looked up, waiting. Power isn't about money, I said. It's about how quietly you can move with it. Remember that. She nodded. And in that moment, the war that had begun at the wedding ended, not with a victory for one side or the other, but with a balance, a mutual understanding, a new dynamic. One built not on assumption, ego, or competition, but on truth. The world still thinks of me as a quiet widow. Let them. The people who matter, the people closest to my son, now understand the truth. I am not someone to dismiss. I am not someone to pity. I am not someone to underestimate. I am the woman who built an empire quietly enough to disappear, and powerful enough to reappear only when I choose. And as I stood on my porch one evening watching the sun sink low over the neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because I won, but because I didn't have to prove anything anymore. They finally saw me, and that was enough. In the end, it wasn't the lawyers, the contracts, or even the money that won. It was silence. Not my silence. Theirs. The same family that once treated me like a fragile old widow suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. The wedding guests who whispered behind champagne flutes now moved aside when I walked past, as if they feared accidentally offending the wrong person. Even Robert Reynolds, who once practically glowed with arrogance, avoided speaking above a polite murmur around me. But the one whose silence shook me the most was Jessica. My daughter-in-law, she who strutted through life like no one could stop her, now approached my home with careful steps, like she was stepping into a boardroom where she wasn't the most powerful woman anymore. The same girl who once offered me financial help out of pity, now shifted uncomfortably as she entered my living room, hands clasped together, knuckles white. I want to apologize, she whispered. The words hung in the air. Not because I didn't expect them, but because I remembered every moment she made me feel small. Every time she corrected me in front of people. Every time she acted embarrassed by me. Every time she asked whether I could afford something. Every time she looked at my modest clothes as though poverty might be contagious. I judged you, she said slowly. And I shouldn't have. I didn't respond. I didn't rescue her. I let her sit in the silence she earned. He swallowed. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, I finally said. You treated me based on who you thought I was. A flush crept up her neck. But I'm trying, she whispered. I want to start over. It wasn't the apology I wanted, but it was the only one she could give. When she left, Dylan came by the next day, this time without her. He sat on my sofa, running a hand through his hair like he used to do as a teenager when he didn't know what to say. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner. There was the apology that actually mattered. I placed my hand on his. You were in love. You saw what you wanted. That's normal. But I should have listened to you. I smiled softly. Then listen now. He nodded, quieter than usual, letting his shoulders drop like he was finally exhaling after weeks of tension. And that's when the real shift happened. He looked at me not as his fragile, aging mother, but as the woman he finally understood me to be. Strong, capable, a force. News of my reveal spread faster than the bouquet toss. Some guests apologized for how they behaved toward me at the reception. Others suddenly wanted to befriend me, so transparently opportunistic that I had to stop myself from laughing. But the ones who surprised me most were Robert and his wife. They invited me to dinner. A quiet restaurant. A private room. Fine crystal velvet seats and low lighting. We owe you an apology, Robert said. We misjudged you. His wife nodded stiffly. Terribly. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I simply replied, many people do. That evening something shifted in their approach to me. Not fear, not intimidation, something else. Respect. The kind that can't be faked. The kind that only appears when someone realizes the person they underestimated could have destroyed them, yet chose not to. Weeks later, Jessica came to me again. This time not to apologize, not to beg, but to ask for advice. Real advice. About business. About strategy. About protecting her and Dylan's financial future. I don't want to make the mistakes my parents made, she admitted. I want to learn. It was the first time I saw her not as an adversary, but as a very young woman trying to grow into the role life thrust upon her. And perhaps for the first time, she looked at me as family. I leaned back in my chair, studying her for a long moment. "I'll teach you," I said. "But only if you understand something first." She looked up, waiting. "Power isn't about money," I said. "It's about how quietly you can move with it. Remember that." She nodded. And in that moment the war that had begun at the wedding ended, not with a victory for one side or the other, but with a balance, a mutual understanding, a new dynamic. One built not on assumption, ego, or competition, but on truth. The world still thinks of me as a quiet widow. Let them. The people who matter, the people closest to my son, now understand the truth. I am not someone to dismiss. I am not someone to pity. I am not someone to underestimate. I am the woman who built an empire quietly enough to disappear, and powerful enough to reappear only when I choose. And as I stood on my porch one evening watching the sun sink low over the neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because I won, but because I didn't have to prove anything anymore. They finally saw me, and that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, let me know what country you are listening in from. Stay tuned and subscribe for more entertaining family drama stories.